Welcome back to you, Teresa. Now, Teresa is also an esteemed psychologist, psychoanalyst, and author. She has a private practice in Scarsdale and Manhattan and provides therapy for adolescents, adults, couples, and families. She teaches and supervises at a number of psychology graduate school and psychoanalytic institutes, and she is also an author. And I am now delighted to congratulate her on her new book, which is coming out this summer, called How Are You? Connection in a Virtual Age, How the Pandemic Changed a Therapist and Her Work Forever. Teresa, we are very proud of you and thank you for your inspirational leadership and for sharing your passion for healing and expertise with our Soroka community.
My pleasure.
Wow. Well, and now it is also my honor to welcome Dr. Emily Arnstein as an expert panelist today. Dr. Arnstein is a clinical and middle school psychologist at the Abraham Joshua Heschel Middle School in Manhattan. She has been supporting dozens of parents, children, and their extended families with the unique and unprecedented challenges that were brought about by this COVID era. She also has a private practice and provides therapy for children, adolescents, and young adults experiencing anxiety, depression, and trauma. And during the pandemic, Emily transitioned her practice to telehealth, and as a psychologist in a school, has been working with students and families as they make the sudden and difficult transition to learning remotely, and then having to transition once again to the hybrid model of learning. Our experts truly have the information that we need today. They have been helping families navigate this range of highly relevant challenges on how to manage screen time, how to help children cope with increasing symptoms of anxiety and depression, and how to deal with loss. So without further ado, back to you, Puzzy, to launch our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And we are going to start the webinar with a conversation between Dr. Therese Rosenblatt and Dr. Emily Arnstein. And then we're going to go, the second half of the webinar will be addressing your questions that you put either in the registration form or through emails. And you can also use here the Q&A icon in the bottom and to text to type your questions live. And we will do our best to address as many as possible. Finally, we're going to share with you a resource page that was put together by our experts after the webinar through your email. So thank you. And to you, Teresa.
Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here and so happy to be talking about this subject that I've been thinking about and writing about and observing for the past year, and also so happy to do it in my capacity as not only a psychologist, but a board member for Soroka, which does such really terrific, necessary work. I want to start by talking about anxiety because that is what I think many of my colleagues are seeing in our offices now, and it's really been mounting throughout the pandemic. And since the focus today is on school-age kids and their families, it really is something that's been mounting, and we're all dealing with the spectrum in families from overcrowding on the one hand, where we're all on top of each other and have none of our privacy and escape valves that we used to isolation at the very same time, where kids are isolated from their peers and their social networks. And social networks is kind of a pun, because what are the kids doing? They're turning more than ever to social media, which is both a godsend and also kind of a problem. And but this is kind of a new normal, hopefully not 100%, but it certainly will wrought changes in our normal way of life that we're learning and having to adapt to. And I want to say that I think it's really important to understand that the definition of mental health is not the absence of stress and anxiety. That is part of life. We are not entitled to not have a pandemic. In fact, there may be more of them. It's how you deal with that. It's how you deal with the stress and anxiety. So that's what we're going to discuss right here and now. A little anxiety is fine. Why is it fine? It's a sign from the environment that something's going on. Being anxious about the conditions of the pandemic, and the pandemic itself is absolutely appropriate. We need that in order to marshal ourselves into action and to mobilize and to address. Too much of it, but it has to be accompanied with good management. That's what we're going to be talking about today, and problem solving. Otherwise, it leads to more anxiety and to more helplessness. So, Emily, I want to start with, what do you think is the right balance between kind of informing kids about what's going on and what do we have to do, and why do we have to wear masks and protect ourselves on the one hand, but on the other, containing that anxiety, giving comfort and reassurance. What are your thoughts about that?
Yes,
and how do you do that?
That's such an important question. First, I just want to say how honored I am to be here today talking about such an important topic. Teresa, to your point, I agree. I'm seeing such an increased level of anxiety over the past year and a half or so, and especially just thinking about how it's presenting and what is that balance between keeping kids in the know, but also reassuring them. So I think there's a few things to focus on to start. I think we have to remember that kids are hearing a lot on their own. They're reading a lot online. They're hearing stuff, whether it be on social media, such on certain TikTok videos or on Instagram posts or on Snapchat, or watching a YouTube video. So they're hearing certain information, which is why I think it's important for parents to have open conversations with their kids. Because if you're having the open conversation, you can dictate the conversation and give them the information that you think is important for them to hear. And we want to make sure that kids aren't hearing misinformation. So by having these talks at home, you can also provide the facts. So that's really important. I think when having this conversation, it's also important to validate how they're feeling. So validate their concerns. Yes, this is really scary, especially maybe for younger kids. It can be really scary to see everyone walking around in the streets wearing masks. It is hard for kids to no longer be able to read facial expressions, to get cues from their environment that they used to get naturally. So point that out. There's like lots of picture books for younger kids that you can focus on if you're not sure on how to talk about what is this virus, what does that mean, which can be really scary. And also just thinking about for older kids too, I think it's important to have these conversations. One thing I do want to point out is that I think probably for all of us, there's probably been an increase in the amount that we listen to the news. And sometimes we just might have the news on in the background. And this constant stream of information can be really consuming and overwhelming, especially for kids. So maybe for you, it could be considered background noise, but for a child, that can be really scary. So I really would recommend being mindful about the amount of news consumption that's happening in the home. Maybe only have it on at certain hours, or maybe have it on when your kids are not around. Try to have it off during dinner or other meals, and really being mindful of that.
That is a great point, Emily. It reminds me of 9/11 when they kept replaying the towers falling down, and to young kids, they may actually think that things that are getting repeated in the news are actually happening over and over again. They don't know that it's just the news trying to fill airtime. I think I agree with everything you're saying, and I would just add to assert reality, validate reality. If they say, gosh, could my friends get sick, my family get sick, don't deny it. Yes, explain what a virus is. Don't deny that actually increases anxiety, and even acknowledge we don't know exactly what's going to happen, and it's a dangerous disease. And kids, I'm finding that a lot of what kids are worried about is not the illness itself, but it's what it's done to their lives, and not seeing their friends and so on. And validate that this is strange and bizarre, and it is happening, and it's hard. On the other hand, you want to stress the positives, but our family's intact. Mom and dad, or just mom or just dad, are doing everything we can to keep you and all of us safe. We love you. We're here. We're present for you. And we're going to we're going to do our best to make your needs met. And that can be very effective. I also want to say, because I do a lot of work with parents and parenting, and some parents are really, like I said earlier, before we started, if they're not literally tearing their hair out, they are in their heads screaming and tearing their hair out because they're just on duty nonstop 24/7, and they're feeling for their kids. It is okay, parents, to sometimes put yourself first. It really is. We have a culture in which we think of kids as delicate and not resilient, and that actually can increase their delicacy. It's okay to sometimes say, you know what, they're a little stressed this evening, but I'm going out for my walk with my friends. That will keep me sane. So that's a good segue into the idea that normal developmental processes with children and adolescents that have to do with education, but socialization, separation processes for the older kids, in other words, gaining more independence, are becoming complicated, if not derailed, by not going into school or by hybrid school, by social distancing. Older children might have, this might be a time of their lives when they have more freedom, when they go off on their own. I just spoke to a parent who wants to use a GPS on her 14-year-old, when, normally teenagers in the past would have gone out, been with their friends, not been accountable for a few hours. So there's a lot of anxiety in the children, and depression, really depression, about not doing this normal adolescent sort of shifting their reference points from parents alone, shifting to parents and peers. And I'm wondering, I'm assuming you're seeing this. And Emily, what do you suggest for things to facilitate socialization for children, and for younger children who need it in a more basic sense, and for adolescents who need it in that more kind of, developing their identity sort of sense? And what can we do to support them through that normal separation process?
Yeah, that's such an important point, and definitely something that I keep hearing and keep seeing. That pre-adolescent, adolescent phase is such a time, as you mentioned, of identity exploration. And a lot of the aspects that they want to explore of their identity, you're not able to do it in the same way when you're at home. I've also been hearing from some kids, I want to share certain things with my friends, but I don't want to say it from my bedroom because I'm scared that my parent will overhear. And so they're internalizing more information, which, as you're saying, can sometimes lead to that symptoms of anxiety and depression because they're not having the outlet to express themselves in a way that they may have been able to in the past. So I think thinking about that is, and this is hard for parents, is we want to empower kids, and sometimes that involves giving them choices. So while there's a lot of limited things that we are outside of our control right now, and there are a lot of safety rules that we have to follow, there are some things that are possible. And if you can give a choice to your child, like you can do option A or option B, and letting your child be the one to pick what they want to do, they're going to feel empowered and feel like they're responsible. They're getting to make some decisions. They're showing their own form of autonomy. And I think that's really important for kids of all ages. I also think that sometimes setting boundaries in the home is really important. So let's say your child is learning remotely. Usually you wouldn't see, and this could be from a younger child. I know there obviously needs to be more supervision. But if your child's learning remotely, usually they would be away at school during the day. So maybe you can say to your child, you know what, I'm going to really respect your time when you're in school, and I'm going to leave you in your room to your classes. I'm not going to open the door. I'm not going to walk around in the room. I'm not going to be in the background, but I'm going to respect that you're sitting in class right now. I'm going to respect that you're maybe socializing with friends. And I think setting those same limits as though that they were out of the home can also feel empowering for kids, and really important to give them their own sense of self, their own space. And also for you as a parent, as Teresa, you said, parents need to have their own limits and boundaries, and it can go both ways. I think self-care is so important right now for both kids and also for parents. And that's one way that we can show that.
So I couldn't have said it any better, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of my own detail to it. And I think that for all kids, but especially for the older kids and the adolescents, it sort of can all be summed up in the word respect. The way I sort of come to think of it is, if you can try to view them as you would someone who's not in your family, and accord them the kind of respect that you would somebody outside of your family, while also setting appropriate boundaries. Choose your battles. Lower your expectations. Don't be a perfectionist. So if you can let go on, maybe make a list of a hierarchy of priorities. Maybe your first priority is to keep them safe. Maybe your second priority is to make sure that they get done their obligations, schoolwork. So you use that as a way to set appropriate boundaries that actually helps kids feel safe, even if they're pushing back. But set expectations for respecting you as well, and for household chores. Instill some household chores that actually build self-esteem. So maybe school's not going so great this year on Zoom, but if they have even just a few tasks that they're responsible for, give space, give privacy, give some freedoms. That's what Emily was talking about. If their room has to be a bit of looks like a tornado went through it, maybe that's something that you loosen up a bit. Let that be their space, their area of control. And to that point, give them an area that they can have control over. That could be their room. Set basic standards, but keep it basic. Don't get perfectionist about it. Also, this again is true for most children, but more the older ones. Let them influence you a little bit. Your children each have a personality. And if you have more than one children, you'll know how different your children are. Let that, and when you're all crowded together, that is going to come out with a little bit more intensity than when they're out of the house a lot. Note who they are, try to work with who they are, and let them influence you a little bit in the expectations and the boundaries that you set. Okay, here's the hot one, everyone. We could probably spend the whole time on this. What about over-reliance on screen time, which seems to have become a pandemic of its own during the pandemic? It was heading that way even before the pandemic, and a major issue, social media, for parents to deal with. And now more than ever, and paradoxically, it's given kids an outlet where they can socialize through games, through TikTok. But we all know that it's going too far. It's causing a lot of craziness, anxiety, and depression in kids. Okay, Emily, how do we manage screen time and social media?
Yeah, I can speak on this for so long, but I'll try to keep it brief for now. I think there's a lot of different factors that we have to consider. I think one just is, for parents, there's so much that's going on online, to be honest, that I'm sure you've never even heard of or you're not aware about. I think the first thing is to educate yourself. And the best way to educate yourself is to ask your children, show me how you're spending your time online. I would love to see your TikTok account. I'd love to see an example of Instagram. I'd love to see what YouTube videos you watch. Show me Roblox. Show me all these different games that they're playing and play with them. I think it will show that you're not trying to say all the time, limit your screen time or get off these, but I'm interested. I want to see what you're doing. And I think kids appreciate that. It is hard when we're living in this digital world. Even right now, we're having this talk virtual. Everyone needs their computer or their phone, and we have to understand that for kids, this is their main outlet. And so I think there needs to be a little less a focus on how much time are you spending behind the screen, and shift it to how are you spending your time on screens. And so what I mean by that is, of course, a lot of kids are learning online, and that, we shouldn't necessarily think about that in the same way when we typically think of screen time. I think it's okay to still set limits and still set boundaries. So maybe you can use your screens between these hours, or you can use screens when you're in these rooms. I think it's okay to still say no screens in the bedroom at night. One way to do that is maybe have a charging station somewhere in the home. Maybe it's in your bedroom, so you collect them at night. Setting times of days when there's no screens. So for example, everyone, parents included, are going to put away all screens during dinner, which means no texting, no checking work emails, no taking phone calls. Or maybe if you're in a car, there's no screens in the car. Because the car, I think, can actually be a really great place for conversation. Oftentimes, it's harder to have conversations with kids when you're making direct eye contact. And so sometimes if you're in a car and you're sitting next to each other, or you're walking on the street, and you're not facing each other, that's when kids actually tend to open up a little bit more. So something to consider. I also think in terms of screens, so again, when I mentioned how are they spending their time, really trying to understand what are they doing. There's difference between just watching YouTube videos all night or binge watching Netflix versus, you know what, I'm in a FaceTime with all my friends and we don't get to hang out in person and we're all talking and hanging out. Can I stay on a little bit longer? Or I'm playing video games and all my friends though are in video games and we're all communicating with each other. I think kids need that social outlet, and that's okay to allow them to do it. But again, it's also okay to still set rules and limits. And it's finding that balance. And I think that balance is really specific to your family. It's really specific to the child and their needs. We know that increased screen time can really impact sleep. And I think this idea of sleep hygiene is really important. And so, maybe you're allowing more time on screens, but you're also cutting it off at a certain hour. And then after that time, you encourage your child to read a book or to hang out or to play a game or to do something else that doesn't involve the screen right before bed. Because I think what I've really observed over the past year is that a lot of kids are staying up so much later, and then they're sleeping so much later, and they're almost like swapping their days and their nights. And this really happens especially over school vacations and during summer break, which is approaching. And so it's really important to monitor that, because you don't want them to flip day to night. That really impacts their sleep cycle. I know I can go on for more. I don't know, Therese, if you want to jump in.
Let me say a few words, and I have a hunch that in the question and answer section, we're going to have more about screens. That is the hot item for parents during the pandemic, but just in general, the pandemic really brought it to a head. I just want to pick up on what you said about switching day and night, because I have a son who's now grown and super responsible and goes to sleep earlier than me and wakes up earlier than me. But he did that. I used to go to sleep at night with a pit in my stomach because I knew he'd be up till 3 or 4 in the morning, having to make the school bus at 7 in the morning. And, teens have a natural proclivity to be more awake at night and need to sleep longer in the morning. Anyway, I think the only thing that I would add to the part about screen time and social media is, let's also remember we do not have control over the pandemic and the crisis we're in. And I see so many parents, how can I do it better? Why can't I make him do this or make her not do that? Let's also really take in what it means to have the limits of our control. The old adolescent adage that parents have known, and teachers, especially for many generations, keep them busy. Keep all kids, but especially adolescents, busy, which is the same as saying that they need to prioritize what keeps them healthy and honoring their obligations. I would think of school on Zoom more as their job and an obligation to get done. If you can shoot for A's, fabulous. A lot of these kids just can't right now. Have them get it done, have them do things that take care of their health, sleep, as Emily said. If you can get them to get some exercise, a big gift now is that it's getting warmer. Let's get outside. If you can get your kids to do chores, that's great. And face-to-face interaction with friends outside as much as possible. Discuss what your family considers safe parameters for socializing. But also, let's not forget about the family. There was a famous study that took place decades ago by somebody named Offit, I think. I'm not sure of it, starting with O, showing that although adolescents do find their peers to be of the utmost importance, more than when they were younger, that they still value their families more than anything. So make some good, fun family time. If they like to watch more, streaming than you would like, join in with them and talk about it. If they're really into video games, it's making you sick, but maybe see if you can join in with some of that. Bake, cook together. I've done more of that with my family when they come to visit. And discuss your values and attitudes about what they're seeing on the screen. Discuss sexuality and what might be seen. Don't think that by avoiding it, they're not going to watch it. Talk about it. Talk about how unreal it is, how real men and women often don't do this stuff, that the violence in a lot of the sexuality, they are curious about sex. They will go and explore that. So talk to them about it beforehand, or during. And talk, just in general, talk to your kids. And then screens can fill in the rest. There's less time, or social media, the stuff that you're not as thrilled about. So finally, let's get to what I'm calling school-generated challenges. Children and adolescents are having difficulty learning on Zoom. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part they are. And many teachers are having difficulty with that as well. There's been a lot of stress created by school uncertainty. Are they going in? Are they not going in? And homeschooling. At home, there are technical and academic challenges which necessitate parents, usually mothers, to become both IT specialists and teachers. So I'm wondering, Emily, have you noticed these things? How could they be addressed? And then also, how do you address the challenges of remote learning and the marked, what I've seen at least, lack of motivation for so many kids with remote learning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has been a challenge. And I think, every school is handling it differently, which I think is a challenge in and of itself. And then we're seeing how often kids are changing, right? All of a sudden last year, they had to transition fully to remote learning. Some kids are still learning fully remote. Some are doing a hybrid model. Some are in person. Some are switching throughout the year. Some switch every other week, depending on your school and schedule. So it's a lot. I think if you're noticing any concerns, for example, that your child's grades are slipping when maybe they used to always do really well, or they're not turning in homework, first, it's always important to communicate with the school. Share what you're observing at home with the school. Sometimes the school, unfortunately, might not be able to see everything in the same way that they were once able to, because we're all behind screens right now. So communicate. I also think this idea of what we refer to as executive functioning skills, which involve things like organization, planning, switching between tasks, is really important. And that's been challenging for a lot of kids, especially in a hybrid model. It's hard to fluctuate between, am I learning remotely? Am I learning in person? What materials do I need when? And so if there's ways to help your kids remain organized, maybe it's writing a schedule for them, encouraging them to write all their homework down in an agenda or planning, working with them sometimes. And I know a lot of kids, especially the older kids, want to be independent and tell you, I got this, I don't need your help. But check in with them at the end of the day. Do you have any homework? Tell me about your upcoming tests. What project do you have? I would love to see what you're working on, which I know can also be really time consuming, and many people are working, but I think this is a way to stay in tune with what your child's doing in school. And so I think that's also a way to stay connected. And I understand that it's tough, but ask them, maybe when you're having dinner one night, say, tell me what you learned in math today. When we phrase a question, how was your day, or tell me about your day, we often get, it was fine. What'd you do today? Nothing. So a way to phrase it more positive might be, tell me 3 things you learned today, or tell me 2 really positive things about your day. You're giving them a prompt, so they have to answer more specific. So it's fine or nothing isn't really an acceptable answer.
Great. And my addition would be, accept the situation. I mean, this is sort of my motto in life. Accept what's real and in front of you. Try not to get into, oh, but if only, and no,
Agree.
we're in a crisis. This is the situation. Adapt to it. That is the name of the game of doing well. Name the situation for your kids, reformulate your goals for them and tasks for daily living. Your goals in this period of their education should be a little different than when they were going to school as normal. Drop the perfectionism. I'm not saying discourage trying to be a good student. No, encourage it. If you can, shoot for an A, that's terrific. But as an overall MO, drop the perfectionism. Get help. As Emily said, reach out to the school. If you need to reach out to a psychologist, if you just need a little, if you can find a little extra housekeeping or babysitting, I mean, get help anyway, or from your parent, any way you can. Also, I think part of acceptance is there are exceptions, but for the most part, this is an inferior way of learning, and the motivation is lower when it's on Zoom and when there's the uncertainty, am I going in, am I not going in? So just accept that and adjust your expectations. Let them treat it as a job and an obligation. Let them take the extra mile if they want to, not if they don't. Here's another one. If the kid is really, these kids are having trouble sitting for hours, in front of Zoom school. Something that we do for kids with ADHD, chunk the studying, break it up, suggest built-in breaks with rewards, whether after you go an hour, half an hour, whether it's a cookie, a walk, a chat with mom or dad, a friend or a sibling, and then go back. Parents are very, very uptight about whether kids are going to meet their academic goals for the year. Hopefully they will, but maybe not. This is going to be a different kind of school year. If the overall context of their community, their family, and their school is a warm, supportive, and enriched one, then they will catch up. It reminds me of a study that I read in graduate school. Kids who are brought up with more than one language in the home tend to learn each language a little slower, but in the end, they learn each language as well, if not better. So think of it that way. And also, if this is all handled with support, your kids will learn a kind of resilience, plus other things that we don't even know what they are right now, adaptive skills for life that don't fall into the conventional A's, B's, and C's. And one final point, we haven't talked a lot about very young kids in this webinar, but remember that kids don't really need to be in school till age 5. So before that, they really need to be very close to the hearth. They need to learn socialization through family members, talking to them, giving them routines. Routines are very important. So try not to stress too much if your kids are under 5 and they didn't get to that preschool, because of social distancing as early as you wanted them to. Give them routines at home, talk to them, be with them. They'll be okay. And that's all. I think the conversation portion of our webinar is ending, and we're going to turn it to Pazit to moderate questions and answers from the audience.
Thank you both. I'm so happy, and we're so happy that this session is recorded because it's packed with great ideas and experience and expertise. So it would be great to go back to soroka.org website and check it out again. You touched on many issues that have been addressed in the questions. And I'm going to address some of the more personal questions that have come in through the Facebook Live and here by live participants, and also in the registration form. So that we have a live participant asking how to approach an actual conflict and power struggle with her kid about screen time. So how do you, if the kid goes automatically to argumentative, and what do you do? How do you approach it and resolve it? And that goes with the second question here. And how do you explain to the kids about the implications of screen addiction? Emily?
Sure. So those are both great questions. I think to the first point, and it's hard to do, it's really important to set limits ahead of time. So not, if your child's in the middle of screens and you're saying it's time to put your screen away, they're probably caught up in something that they're already doing and aren't going to hear you. So I would find time with them when they're not currently in screens, you're not currently working or cooking or doing any of the things you may be doing, and sit down and say, we're going to come up with some ideas and goals related to your screen time, and have your child be part of the conversation. Say to them, what do you think is a fair amount of time? Here's what I think. Get their input, get your input, and find a compromise. I would also really ask them, what is it about screen times that's important to them? If you can understand why it's important, you might be able to understand why it's causing an argument for them. Maybe they're going through something and they really want to be able to connect with friends. I think a lot of times we think that what kids are doing on screens are negative. Sometimes it could be, but there's also so many wonderful positive things about screens. For example, if you're a writer, you can maybe publish some of your writing. I know that a lot of kids like writing fan fiction, and there's a lot of websites on that. Or if you're an artist, you might be able to post some of your artwork online and you get positive feedback. Or maybe you're doing some group conversation. So whatever it is, try to find what the reason is that they want on their screen, and then based on that, set some rewards. And then in terms of the implication piece, provide psychoeducation with them. There's a lot of great resources out there, documentaries. Watch these films and read these books with your kids so they can understand it. There's some TED Talks out there that are helpful. I think Pazit's also putting, as she said, we'll share resources after this that you can look at, which I think can really fuel the conversation with your child.
Right, there's some movie links in the resource document that would be very helpful on that topic. Dr. Therese Rosenblatt, would you like to add how to explain to our kids about the destructive and addictive aspects?
I think, as I said earlier, a few minutes ago, I think you just need to face it head on. I think, we're all used to, the sort of when you just approach your kids out of the blue with a tough subject, the eye roll, the embarrassment, I don't want to talk about it. So, I would say, I think in general, this is true when you want to broach difficult topics with your kids or fraught topics, is especially for the older kids. With younger kids, it's much easier to dictate when you talk to them. I used to have a thing when my kids were young that I would call lying time. When I put them to bed or when they went to bed, I would lie with each one in the dark for a few minutes. And I would ask them, I would see what they wanted to raise and what they wanted to talk about. And that would be a lot of things would come out. It's like being in the car where somehow they're not quite aware of what they're talking about. And a lot tumbles out. I got a lot of good information. So you can sort of set things up more yourself when they're younger. When they're older, try if you can't always do it, if you can drop something when they come to you, they will also often come to you. You may not even be aware of it because you're so busy, you're like, oh, not now, with some question or topic that if you stopped and went, whoa, like, here, let me grab this opportunity. He's raising, sex on screens, or I don't know, anything. Or my kids used to say, all my friends want to do when I go over there is play video games. It gets boring. Like, what a great opener. Or as Emily said, the car, for some reason in the car, they seem to be unaware of, they just sort of tumble and talk. Or if you're driving them and their friends, they sit in the back, they seem to not know that you have ears, and they talk about all the things that matter to them. So try to time it that way. But other than that, just tell them, you are, Dr. Lisa D'Amour calls it yuckiness. You can do anything on the screen, but no yuckiness, which is no violence or sex on the screen. Discuss your attitudes. Focus on the things that matter to you. I think a very good guard against being overly sucked into porn is to prioritize relationships. The more you have rich relationships with your children and keep open the avenues of communication. And what does that mean? If they raise, drugs and drinking, you don't just go, no, never. You draw them out. How is that happening? Why are you uptight about saying no? How could you? I used to tell my kids, walk around with a thing of beer in your hand and take a sip every now and then, but you can dump it, just look like you're part of it. I'm just saying, so, and as Emily points out, there are great things in the media. There was the social something or other, I'm blanking on the name now, that great documentary, The Social Dilemma, that actually depicts how addicting screens are, and they are. And one of the issues, to Emily's point about setting the expectations beforehand, is if you've ever seen a kid involved in something on their screen and you try to take them off, it is like taking drugs away from an addict. So the more you can discuss it beforehand and set the expectations beforehand, and as Emily said, find out what they get out of it. So if it's the socializing, then you can find a way to address that. If it's a compress after homework, then you can structure it that way.
Okay, thank you very much. We have many more questions. One is, how do I make sure that my kid is truly engaged in school Zoom? That's particular to Emily, and not playing on the side while school is going on through Zoom with their electronics, because I see that happening a lot. And who is responsible for this type of engagement while school is in action? Is it the parent or the educator? Emily?
Yes, that is definitely difficult to do this year. So one thing is that as a parent, you can set certain controls on a child's computer. And so what I'd recommend is putting in certain controls so that they can't be looking at certain websites and playing certain games during the day. So that's one thing. In terms of who's in control, it's really hard because as educators behind a screen, there's only so much that you can see on the other side. Educators can't see what they're doing. And let me tell you, kids are very clever and have gotten creative in how to maybe make it look like there is a poor connection or put a different picture of themselves to make them feel fully engaged. And so I think as parents, maybe checking in every so often with your child. I know I mentioned earlier not going into the room during the school day, which I think is important, but maybe talking to your child, tell me what your schedule is today. When do you have a break? And then maybe during the break, going in and kind of seeing and asking, okay, tell me about math class earlier. What did you do today? Let me see the notes that you took. Let me see the homework that you submitted. Oh, there were no notes in class today. It's probably unlikely, right? There's probably something that they had to be doing, some handout or some reading or some PowerPoint that they looked at. I'm not saying all the time, but ask to be involved, ask them to show you what they're doing. Show me your homework. I think that holds kids more accountable as opposed to saying, did you do your homework? Yeah, I did it. Okay, great. Let me see it. Oh, like I handed it in and you don't worry about it. You know, kids get creative. So I think in terms of parents, it's important to be engaged, be involved, tell me what you learned, show me what you learned, and trying to set controls during the day. But at the same time, there has to be a little bit element of trust. And just like if a kid is in school, sometimes kids zone out during a classroom. We all know that probably from our own experience. Sometimes you zone out for a few minutes and you missed it. And so it's okay if kids are also zoning out for a little bit on Zoom. But you want to keep them engaged and encourage them to take movement breaks throughout the day. Therese referenced this earlier, but whenever there's a break in the day, encourage them to leave their room, to stand up, to do a lap, maybe do jumping jacks or push-ups or go outside for a few minutes, depending on how long their break is. But encourage them to pull out of their room and to also take a break from the screens. I actually think a lot of schools have put in more breaks this year, and schools are aware of that. So schools can encourage breaks, but they can't really enforce it since they're not in the home. But what you can do is try to make sure that you're enforcing it and say, this is a 10-15-minute break in your schedule. I want you to take this 10-15-minute break, shut your laptop, get off your screen, and come have a snack and come talk to me.
Yeah, before Therese Rosenblatt is answering this question, I have another follow-up question on what Therese said about being until age of 5, being at home mostly. You know, there's a question here of kids that are older than 5, and some kids' characters, like, they benefit, especially during the pandemic, more from homeschooling or something. Is it always better to encourage our kids to go to school or through Zoom school, or are there situations that we can embrace them being with educational activities at home with their parents or a peer?
Are you directing that to either one of us, or?
I'm directing it to either one of you. Anyone wants to take that first?
I'll take that one. I am a big believer in it depends, and I think kids are just as different from each other as adults are. I think for the most part, it's a very safe generalization to say that all kids need some social outlet, but what it is, in what form and when, can differ very widely. And we're used to thinking of adolescents as, oh, they need groups and they need to party. That's not true for all of them. There are plenty of them that, you know, are more homebody-ish, the way some adults are. So I would say, you know, get to know your kids. A lot of my parenting work is about, who is this kid that you're dealing with? Let's get to know them. So if the kid seems very happy to learn at home, and you as the parent, or at least the atmosphere that you're offering at home between you or the father or the trusted nanny or whatever, or other siblings around, if this is providing a setting that is working for your kid and, you know, they like it, I don't think you should automatically go to, oh, I've got to get them into school. I think it's safe to say that, you know, every child you need to figure out some social outlet. And my hunch is that most kids would want to be in school, or at least want to be in school part of the time, maybe not all of the time. So, you know, watch what's going on with them and ask them, do you want to be in school? Is it hard to be at home? Are you enjoying being at home? Are you enjoying being at home part of the time? How is that affecting your studies? You know, do you miss your friends? Gather your intel from them.
Thank you. Emily, do you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece in terms of that open communication. I will say that I think we've seen an increase in school avoidance this year. And I think it's really important to monitor that. We don't know what the fall will look like or the future will look like. Hopefully, all kids will return to in person. And so it's also really important that kids feel safe going to school and feel comfortable in school. And we don't want them to get into a routine that not going feels that that's an option, because that might not always be an option for them. And so it's important, I think, to keep talking about the benefits with your kids about learning in person so that they will want to return whenever that is an option to them.
May I just pick up on that for a moment? See,
Sure.
there's always a subsection of kids that are school avoiders pre-pandemic at any time. And we do know that with school avoiders, the less they go to school, the harder it is to go back. So if you think that your kid is using this as a reason to avoid school, and it's more of avoidance as opposed to loving being at home, because maybe they're the kind of kid that only needs a couple of best friends and their family, and they're okay being at home or in a hybrid situation. That's one thing. The avoidance situation, I think, is another, and we want to address how avoidance can make it harder to go back.
Great. Let's move on. We only have 7 more minutes and a few questions left. So we'll do our best to address as many as possible. We have here a question from a board member. What are the signs of stress in children and teens that may be different during COVID-19? Emily?
Sure, that's a good question. In terms of it looking different, I think that sometimes it might actually look similar, what we sometimes might call red flags. Is there a lack of engagement to school? Are there changes in a child's sleeping patterns or eating patterns? Have you noticed a change in your child's mood or affect? Is there social withdrawal? I've heard a lot from parents who say, you know what, I'm trying to get my kids engage with friends outside in a safe and socially responsible way, but they don't want to go outside. They don't want to see their friends. If that I think is something that is different, where an added piece of this anxiety, which we talked about, is that some kids have developed this fear of going outside because going outside means no longer feeling safe in the same way. And I think that's really important to address. And so if you're noticing that your child's saying, you know what, I don't want to go out, I don't want to go play, I don't want to go to the park, I don't want to see my friends, talk to them about that. Try to figure out what's going on. Is there a decline in their academic functioning? Are they handing in homework less? Are they not doing as well as they had in the past? Are you getting more emails from school that they're late or they didn't log into school and they didn't go to Zoom school that day? Do you feel like they're withdrawing at home? So for example, are they spending more and more time in their room, even when you're maybe having a family movie night or a family game night or a family meal? Are they saying, you know what, I don't want to do that? And for some kids, it might be like, we spent more time together this past year or so than ever before, and another family game might feel too much, and for another it could be a red flag of maybe that child's feeling more anxious or feeling more down and wants to be withdrawn.
Thank you very much,
So
Therese.
I would just, I don't have much to add to that. You covered all the points. The one thing that I would stress is I listen to a lot of sort of older adolescents who and parents who say, my older adolescent, isn't talking to me, wants to be in their room a lot. And I also listen to the same age kids say, my parents are really upset. They keep telling me I need to spend more time with the family. I need to get out of my room. I need to do this and that with them and talk to them. And they're saying, I'm fine, but I just need privacy. I just need time to myself. And this is all part of their very healthy, very normal developmental separation. They need some, and the old adage with boys versus girls, where the boys would, lock themselves in the room and not talk, and the girls would argue, and that's their way. So this is all, that all may be a little heightened because we're all thrown together. It's not necessarily a negative sign. It actually may be a sign that they're trying to proceed on their developmental track. So in other words, don't take everything personally. Agreed with Emily's red flags, but also try to step back and not take everything personally.
Thank you both. And we did mention the load, not only the workload, but the mental load on parents. And I want to, almost end up by shifting the way to parents, because children pick up on parents' mental difficulties, and it's a lot of it is so legitimate with the load and the different hats parents have to take, especially during the pandemic. How can parents seek coaching support, especially those that are not used to this and have introverts or have a hard time in seeking some help? What would you recommend to parents that are feeling very pressured and even, stressed out, depressed, or other anxiety, or, other feelings, and it's affecting the whole family? Emily?
I'll take this. Yeah.
Yes, please, Theresa.
This is a big section of my work, and let's start with it is what it is right now. I spoke to somebody just yesterday, a young new mother who's, stuck at home alone with her baby, isolated all day long, and is kind of losing her mind. And it was enormously helpful to her when we went through, everything that was going wrong that she wanted, but seemed not right to pursue. And when I said, look, this is just the way it is right now, and maybe you have to sit with some difficult feelings, that it can be lonely, it can be isolating, it can, the work is too much, but it will pass. This is a normal stage, especially during the pandemic. You can tolerate it. It will pass. So I think you have to start with that. But otherwise, I think when you start feeling resentment, you're resenting your kids, you're resenting your husband, usually it means you are not feeling in control, not of them or the pandemic, but of yourself and the way you're handling things. Think about, what do you need? How do you need to handle this situation differently, and try to speak to that. And finally, the isolation and being stuck alone with your own frustrations is one of the hardest parts. There are parenting groups and chats and things online or outside now in person that are springing up all over. I didn't put this out, but I know of several developmental parenting groups. Get online with them. If you can get help, more help at home, if you're able to do that and pay for that safely, go ahead. If you have family members that can help you, do that. And prioritize yourself. Sometimes your kids will survive. They're not that delicate. But if you're getting to that point where you're just ready to scream, if you think of it this way, you will be a better parent if you went and took a walk with a friend or played tennis or whatever makes you feel good, have a book group, and then go back to your kids. You will feel refreshed.
Yes, before we go to Emily, we would love to hear from you, Emily. I just want to remind everybody that we had also a session with you, Theresa, and a specialist in the power of mindfulness. And so that's another thing that I just recall, and people can view the recorded session online at soroka.org. Emily, please let us know how to support the parents that hold the families.
Yeah, well, I would agree with everything that was just said. And I was also thinking about mindfulness. Sometimes just taking a few moments to yourself. There's so many wonderful apps you can use or YouTube videos to follow. practicing self-care. What is important to you? Maybe it's that morning walk or having that coffee by yourself in silence before everyone wakes up, whatever it may be. I also think, obviously, we're all big proponents of therapy. Seeking out your own support is really important. If you feel like you need a safe space and someone else to talk to, follow like your inner instinct and reach out to that support. I think that if you are having trouble finding a resource, you can always call your insurance company and ask for referrals. You can reach out to the school sometimes in the schools. If there's a school psychologist or school counselor, they might be able to find something. Psychology Today is a great resource to find support. I also would echo, there are so many parenting groups, and whether it be on Facebook or online in some capacity, just to be able to connect with other people and hear other people's experiences, and try not to internalize it on your own. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. This has been so challenging. And I think it's okay to share these concerns with your family or with your friends and say, this has been my experience. What's your experience like? I think that's also validating. And I think it could be validating sometimes to even share with your family or with kids, like, I had a really hard day. I felt really stressed. I felt really overwhelmed. Here's why. Your child might say, oh, I did too. I felt really stressed. Here's why. And that might lead to more open communication, which I think is really important.
And I'm glad you, I forgot, reaching out to a professional. People tend to think, some people think, oh, you got to be crazy. It's a sign of weakness. No, all we are as therapists are another human being to engage with you in a deeply human process of therapy. And we're the guide, that's true. We are providing guidance, but we're also just partnering with you. And we can help you see things that maybe you may not be able to see because you're in the midst of it. And it can be really a godsend.
So one last question, absolutely brief and last questions, because we're already over time. Thank you both. It's been really inspiring and enriching. If you can share with us, as we are transitioning into a more open communication in society and safer space to interact and socialize and learn and teach, as if you can share one thing that you are very proud of that happened to you this year in terms of children, and that keep you hopeful and satisfied, if it was a small incident of a breakthrough or something that you felt very proud of what you do. You help so many people, you support so many people. We're going to start with Emily.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I think for me, what's been incredible over the past year or so is just how flexible everyone has had to be and make all these transitions. And I've really just been able to observe that overall, people, especially children, adolescents, they are resilient. And it's really been incredible to see just how resilient kids are, and adults and parents as well. As much as everything has changed and everything's been such a challenge, for the most part, people have pulled through. And I think it's been amazing to see people help each other, people reach out to each other during such difficult times, to see the community come together. I think it's really been amazing, and just to see that resilience.
I would say for me, I'm not a Pollyanna, and I don't like being a Pollyanna. In fact, my husband sometimes accuses me of being a little bit too much in the camp of wanting to embrace reality and not see it through rose-colored glasses. And I do believe in that. Okay, that said, I think what's been incredibly inspiring to me is to see the silver linings, not in the pandemic or illness, but in the circumstances of it, and how people, and I'm going to include myself, have found incredible silver linings in it. And just now to use myself as an example, and I know I'm not alone, I've spoken to many others who've had this experience, bringing it back to children. My children are grown, but they've all taken turns spending extended amount of time living in our household with their partners. And it's given that was an amazing opportunity with grown kids, but B, even more than that, because we had to live together with now them as adults, young adults, they're in their 20s and one 31 to 32. And because I couldn't treat them as children, I had to really make space for them. I really told myself, you've got to get to know them, not as the people that you just kind of thought you knew growing up, but who are these people? Who are these kids of yours? And I've gotten to know my kids and their partners in a whole different way, in a way that I would almost with friends. And we've kind of developed our relationships in a really wonderful, interesting, new way. And it's been about being open and about adapting to what is, as opposed to what we wish things were.
Thank you. That is great. It's great to learn and experience that even during challenging times, we get to, to benefit and have new breakthroughs and new relationship developments with our loved ones. Thank you all for coming. Please keep in touch at soroka.org. Thank you very much, Dr. Emily Arnstein and Dr. Therese Rosenblatt, for being with us today.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Likewise.
Shalom, bye-bye.
Shalom.